Hello everyone, you are just joining in a literary heaven, the Literary Nook by Fairy. Let's start our today's topic, but before going further, don't forget to subscribe my channel, like the videos and share. Today I'm gonna discuss about the Renaissance period, that is from 1500 to 1600. The Renaissance period in English literature is also called the Elizabethan period or the Shakespearean age or age of Shakespeare or the period of Shakespeare. The Middle Ages in Europe were followed by the Renaissance. Renaissance means the revival of learning, and it denotes in its broadest sense the gradual enlightenment of human mind after the darkness of the Middle Ages. With the fall of Constantinople in 1453 AD by the invasion of the Turks, the great scholars who were residing there spreading all over the Europe and brought with them invaluable Greek manuscripts. The discovery of these classical models resulted in the revival of learning in the 15th and 14th century. The essence of this movement was the main man discovered himself and the universe, and that man so long blinded had suddenly opened his eyes and seen. The flood of Greek literature, which the new art of the printing carried swiftly to every school in Europe, revealed a new world of poetry and philosophy. Along with the revival of learning, new discoveries took place in several other fields. Vasco da Gama circumnavigated the earth, Columbus discovered America, and Copernicus discovered the solar system and prepared the ways for Galileo. Books were printed, philosophy, science, and art were systemized. The Middle Ages were past, and the old world had become new. Scholars flocked to the universities and adventurers to the new world of the America, and there the old authority received a death blow. Truth only was authority to search for the truth everywhere, and as men sought for new lands and goals and the fountain of youth. That was a new spirit which awoke in the Europe with the revival of learning. The chief characteristic of the Renaissance was its emphasis on humanism, which means man's concern with himself as an object of contemplation. This movement was started in Italy by Dante, Petrarch, and Boccaccio in the 14th century, and from there it spread to other countries of Europe. In England, it became popular during the Elizabethan period. This movement, which focused its interest on the proper study of mankind, had a number of subordinate trends, and the first in importance was the rediscovery of classical antiquity and the particularity of ancient Greece. During the medieval period, the tradition bound Europe had forgotten the liberal tone of old Greek world and its spirit of democracy and human dignity. With the revival of interest in Greek classical antiquity, the new spirit of humanism made its impact on the Western world. The first Englishman who wrote under the influence of Greek studies was Sir Thomas More. His Utopia, written in Latin, was suggested by Plato's Republic. Sir Philip Sidney, in his defense of poesy, accepted and advocated the critical rules of ancient Greece. The second important aspect of humanism was the discovery of the external universe and its significance for man. But more important than this was that the writers directed their gaze inward and became deeply interested in the problems of human personality. In the medieval morality plays, the characters are mostly personifications, friendship, charity, sloth, wickedness, and the like. But now, during the Elizabethan period, under the influence of humanism, the emphasis was laid on the qualities which distinguish one human being from another, give an individuality and uniqueness. Moreover, the revealing of the writer's own mind became full of interest, and this tendency led to the rise of the new literary form, the essay, which was used successfully by Bacon. And in drama, Marlowe probed down into the deep recesses of human passion. His heroes, Tamburlaine, Dr. Faustus, and Barabbas, the Jew of Malta, are possessed of uncontrolled ambitions. Shakespeare, a more consummate artist, carried humanism to perfection. His genius, fed by the spirit of the Renaissance, enabled him to see life whole and to present it in its all aspects. So it was the new interest in human personality, the passion for life, which was responsible for the exquisite lyrical poetry of the Elizabethan age, and dealing with the problems of death, decay, transitoriness of life, etc. Another important aspect of humanism was the enhanced sensitiveness to the formal beauty and the cultivation of the aesthetic sense. It showed itself in a new deal of or new ideal of social conduct, that of the courtier, an Italian diplomat and a man of letters. Castiglione wrote a treatise entitled The Courtier, where he sketched the pattern of gentlemanly behavior and mannerism upon which the conduct of such men as Sir Philip Sidney and Sir Walter Raleigh was modelled. And this cult of elegance in prose writing produced the ornate style called Euphuism by Lilly. Though it suffered from exaggeration and pedantry, yet it introduced order and balance in English prose and gave it pithiness and harmony. Another aspect of humanism was that of man came to be regarded as responsible for their own actions. The next one is Elizabethan drama. During the Renaissance period, or the Elizabethan period as it is popularly called, the most remarkable achievement in literary or literature or the field of literature was in the field of drama. One of the results of the humanist teaching in the schools and the universities had been great development of the study of Latin drama and the growth of the practice of acting Latin plays by Terence, Plautus, and Seneca, and also of the contemporary works both in Latin and English. These performances were of the work of amateur actors, schoolboys, or the students of the universities and inns of the court, and were often given in honor of the visits of royal persons and ambassadors. Their significance lies in the fact that they brought and educated classes into touch with a much more highly developed kind of drama than the older English plays. About the middle of the 16th century, some academic writers made attempts to write original plays in English. The three important plays of this type are Nicola Udala's Ralph Roister Doister, John Still's Groomer Girton's Needle, and Thomas Sackville's Gorbudic or Ferox and Porrex. The first two are comedies and last one is tragedy. All these plays are monotonous and do not possess much literary merit. The second period of Elizabethan drama was dominated by the university wits, a professional set of literary men. Of these little constellations, Marlowe was the central sun, and round him revolved as minor stars as Lilly, Green, Peel, Lodge, and Nash. So the university wits include Lilly, the author of Euphues, wrote a number of plays, and the best known of them are Come, Pesp, Seth, and Fowl. And these plays are mythological and pastoral and are nearer to the masque. The next one is George Peele, formed along with Marlowe, Green, and Nash, one of that band of the dissolute young men endeavoring to earn a livelihood by literary work. He was an actor as well as writer of the plays. He wrote some half dozen plays, which are richer in beauty than any of his group except Marlowe. His earliest work is The Arraignment of Paris. The next one is Thomas Cade. He achieved great popularity with his first work, The Spanish Tragedy, which was translated in many European languages. The next one is Robert Greene. He lived a most desolate life and died in distress and debt. His plays comprise Orlando and Furioso, Friar Bacon, and Friar Bungay, and he's gained much popularity during those days. Its variety of interest and comic relief and to the entertainment of the audience. But the chief merit of the play lies in the lively method of the personality of the story of the plays written by him. And the next or the foremost important one is Christopher Marlowe. The dramatic work of Lodge and Nash is not much of importance. Of all the members of the group, Marlowe is the greatest. In 1587, his first play, Tamburlaine, was produced, and it took the public by storm on account of its impetuous force, its splendid command of blank verse, and sensitiveness to beauty. In this play, Marlowe dramatized the exploits of the Scythian shepherd who rose to be the terror of the world and the scourge of God. Tamburlaine was succeeded by the tragical history of the Dr. Faustus, in which Marlowe gave an old medieval legend and romantic setting. The story of the scholar who sells his soul to the devil for worldly enjoyment and unlimited power is presented in most fascinating manner, and Marlowe's Faustus is the genuine introduction or incarnation of the Renaissance spirit. The Jew of Malta, the third tragedy of Marlowe, is not so fine as Dr. Faustus, though it has a glorious opening. His last play, Edward II, is his best from the technical point of view, though it lacks the force and rhythmic beauty of the earlier plays. It is superior to them on the account of its rare skill of construction and admirable characterization. Marlowe's contribution to the Elizabethan drama were great. He raised the subject matter of the drama to a higher level. He introduced heroes who were men of great strength and vitality, possessing the Renaissance characteristic of insatiable spirit of adventure. He gave life and reality to the characters and introduced passion on the stage. He made the blank verse supple and flexible to suit the drama. He thus made the work of the Shakespeare in the respect easy. He gave coherence and unity to drama, which it was formerly lacking. And he also gave beauty and dignity and poetic glow to drama. In fact, he did the pioneering work on which Shakespeare built the grand edifice. Thus, he has been rightly called the father of English dramatic poetry. The greatest of all Elizabethan dramatists was Shakespeare, in whose hand the romantic drama reached its climax. As we do not know much about his life, and it is certain that he didn't have proper training and education as an author or dramatist of the period. Had his spontaneous achievements are an enigma to all the scholars up to the present day. It is still a mystery how a country boy, poor and uneducated, who came to London in search for odd jobs to scrap a living, could reach such heights in dramatic literature. Endowed with a marvelous imaginative and creative mind, he could put new life into old familiar stories and make them glow with deepest thoughts and tenderest feeling. There is no doubt that Shakespeare was a highly gifted person, but without proper training, he could not have scaled such heights. In spite of the merged material we have got about his life, we can summarize that he must have undergone proper training, first as an actor, second as a reviser of the old play, and third as an independent dramatist. He worked with other dramatists and learned the secrets of their trade. He must have studied deeply and observed minutely the people he came in contact with. His dramatic output must therefore have been the result of his natural genius as well as of the hard work and industry. Besides non-dramatic poetry, consisting of two narrative poems, Venus and Adonis and the Rape of Lucrece, and 154 sonnets, Shakespeare wrote 37 plays. His work as a dramatist extended over 24 years and bringing about 1588 and ending about 1612. This work is generally divided into four periods. The first period of Shakespeare belongs to the early experimental work. To this period belongs the revision of old plays as the three parts of Titus, Andronicus, Henry, and his first comedy is Love's Labour Lost, The Two Gentlemen of Verona, The Comedy of Errors, A Midsummer Night's Dream, his first chronicle play Richard, a youthful tragedy, and Romeo and Juliet. The second one belongs to the Shakespeare great comedies and chronicle plays as The Merchant of Venice, Much Ado About Nothing, The Merry Wives of Windsor, and As You Like It and Twelfth Night. These plays reveal Shakespeare's great development as a thinker and technician, and they show the maturity of his mind and art. The third one belongs to the greatest tragedy and sombre or bitter comedies, and this is the high peak period, characterized by highest development of his thought and his expressions. He is more concerned with the darker side of the human experiences and its destructive passion. Even in the comedies, the tone is grave and there is greater emphasis on the evil. The plays of this period are Julius Caesar, Hamlet, All's Well That Ends Well, Mayer for Mayer, Troilus and Cressida, Othello, King Lear, Macbeth, Antony and Cleopatra, and furthermore. The fourth period belongs to the later comedies and dramatic romances. Here, the cloud seems to have been lifted, and Shakespeare is in changed mood. Though the tragic passions still play their part in the third period, the evil is now conquered by good, and the tone of the play is gracious and tender. There is a decline in the power of expression and thought. The plays written during this period are Cymbeline, The Tempest, The Winter's Tale, which were completely written in collaboration with some other dramatists. So, the plays of Shakespeare are so full of contradictory thought expressed so convincingly in different contexts that it is not possible to formulate a system of philosophy out of them. Each of his characters, from the king of the clown to clown, from the most high intellectual to the simpleton, judges life from his own angle and utters something which is so profound and appropriate that one is astonished at the playwright's versatility or genius. His style and versification are of the highest order. He was not only the greatest dramatist of the age, but also the first poet of the day, and one of the greatest of the all times. His plays are full of large number of exquisite songs and sonars glowing with passion and sensitiveness to beauty, reach the high watermark of the poetic excellence in English literature. And in his plays there is a fine commingling of dramatic and lyric elements. Words and images seems to flow from his brain spontaneously, and they are clothed in a style which can be called perfect. Though Shakespeare belonged to the Elizabethan age on account of his universality, he belongs to all times and all ages. Even after the lapse of 3 centuries, his importance, instead of decreasing, has considerably increased. Every time we read him, we become more conscious of his greatness, like the charm of the Cleopatra. Age cannot wither her, nor custom stale her infinite writing. So the appeal of Shakespeare is perennial. His plays and poetry are like a great river of life and beauty. The next or the foremost important, as we can say, is Ben Jonson, a contemporary of Shakespeare and a prominent dramatist of his times. Was just the opposite of Shakespeare. Jonson was a classicist, a moralist, and a reformer. The contemporary society. In his comedy, he tried to present the truer picture of, as we can say, the contemporary society. He has also made an attempt to have the unities of time, place, and action in his play. Unlike Shakespeare, who remained hidden behind his work, Johnson impressed upon the audience the excellence of his works and object of his plays. He also made his plays realistic rather than romantic, introduced which mean some particular traits in character which obsess an individual and govern all the faculties of human being. Johnson was mainly a writer of comedies, and of these four which attained outstanding success are Welpon, The Silent Woman, The Alchemist. Two other important humor are Every Man in His Humor or Every Man Out of Humor. The Alchemist, which is the most perfect in structure, is also the most brilliant realistic Elizabethan comedy. And Volpone is a satirical study of the avarice on the heroic scale. So Ben Jonson was a profound classical scholar who wanted to reform the Elizabethan drama, introduce form and method in it, resolved to fight against cheap romantic effects, limit his art within the bounds of reason and common sense. He was intellectual and satirical writer, unlike Shakespeare, who was imaginative and sympathetic. His chief contribution to dramatic theory was his practice and construct plays based on humor or some master passion. On this way, he created a new type of comedy having its own method, scope, and purpose. Though he drew his principles from the ancients, he depicted the contemporary life in his plays in a most realistic manner, and in this way, Johnson broke from the romantic tendency of Elizabethan drama. Poetry in the Renaissance period took a new trend. It was the poetry of the new age of discovery, enthusiasm, and excitement. Under the impact of the Renaissance, the people of the England were infused with freshness and vigor, and these qualities are clearly reflected in poetry of that age. The poetry of Elizabethan age opens with publications of a volume known as Total's Miscellany, 1577. This book, which contained the verse of Sir Thomas Waite and the Earl of Surrey, marks the first English poetry of the Renaissance. Waite and Surrey wrote a number of songs, especially sonars, which adhered to the Petrarchan model, which was later adopted by Shakespeare. They also attempted the blank verse which was improved upon by Marlowe and then perfected by Shakespeare. They also experimented a great variety of meters which influenced Spencer. Thus, Waite and Surrey stand in the same relation to the glory of the Elizabethan poetry, dominated by Spencer and Shakespeare, as Thomson and Collins do to the Romantic poetry dominated by Wordsworth and Shelley. Another original writer belonging to the early Elizabethan group of the poets who were mostly courtier was Thomas Sackville. In his Mirrors of Magistrate, he has given a powerful picture of the underworld, where the poet describes his meetings with some famous Englishmen who had been the victims of misfortunes. Sackville, unlike Waite and Surrey, is not a cheerful writer, but he is superior to them in poetic technique. The greatest of these early Elizabethan poets was Sir Philip Sidney. He was a many sided person and a versatile genius, soldier, courtier, and a poet also. He distinguished himself in all these capacities, like Dr. Johnson and Barron, stood in symbolic relation to his times. He may be called the ideal Elizabethan, representing in himself the great qualities of that age in English history and literature. Queen Elizabeth called him one of the jewels of her crown, and at the age of 23, he was considered one of the ripest statesmen of the age. As the literary figure, Sidney made his mark in prose as well. In poetry, his prose work are Arcadia, an apology for poetry, with Arcadia being a new kind of imaginative writing, though written in prose, it is strewn with love songs and sonnets. The Apology for Poetry is the first of the series of rare and very useful commentaries which some English poets have written about their art. His greatest work, of course, is in poetry, the sequence of sonnets entitled Astrophel and Stella, in which Sidney celebrated the history of his love for Penelope, and a love which came to a sad end through the intervention of Queen Elizabeth, with whom Sidney had quarrel. As an example of lyrical poetry expressing directly in the most sincere manner an intimate sequence marks on the epoch. The greatest merit is their sincerity, and the sequence of the poet's feeling is analyzed with such vividness and minuteness that we are convinced of his truth and sincerity. So, besides these personal and sincere touches, sometimes the poet gives a loose rein to the imagination, and he gives us fantastic imagery which was characteristic of Elizabethan poetry. The greatest name in non dramatic Elizabethan poetry is that of Spenser, who may be called the poet of the chivalry and medieval allegory. The Elizabethan age was the age of transition, when the time honored institutions of chivalry, closely allied to Catholic ritual, were being attacked by the zeal of the Protestant reformer and the enthusiasm for the letters of the European humanists. As Spencer was in sympathy with both the old and the new one, he tried to reconcile these divergent elements in his greatest work, poetic work, The Fairy Queen, written in the form of an allegory, though on the surface of it appears to be dealing with the petty intrigues, corrupt dealings, and clever manipulations of the politicians in the court of Elizabeth. Yet, when seen from a higher point of view, it brings before us the glory of the medieval times clothed in an atmosphere of romance. We forget the harsh realities of life and lift it into a fairyland where we see knights performing chivalric deeds for the sake of honor, Queen Gloriana, and we meet with shepherds, slaven nymphs, and stars breathe the air of the romance, fantasy, and chivalry. Though Spencer fame rests mainly on the Fairy Queen, he also wrote some other poems of the great merit. His Shepherd's Calendar is a pastoral poem written in an artificial classical style which had become popular in Europe on the account of the revival of learning, consisting of 12 parts and each devoted a month of year. Here the poets give expression to his unfruitful love for a certain unknown Rosalind. Though the mouth of the shepherd talking and singing, it also deals with the various moral questions and the contemporary religious issues, and the same type of conventional pastoral imagery was used by Spencer Astrophil, an elegy which he wrote on the death of the Sidney to whom he had dedicated the calendar. and so he had become very popular in those days under the influence of Italian literature, described beautifully the progress of his love for Elizabeth Boyle, whom he married in 1594. His epithalamion is the most beautiful marriage hymn in the English language. So the greatness of Spenser as a poet rests on his artistic excellence. Though his poetry is surcharged with noble ideas and lofty ideals, he occupied an honor place in the front rank of the English poets as a poet of the beauty, music, harmony, through which he brought about a chronicle or reconciliation between the medieval and the modern world. There is no harsh note on all his poetry. He composed his poems in the spirit of the great painter, a great musician above all. He was the poet of the imagination, who, by means of his art, gave an enduring to the offsprings of his imagination as a mattress. His greatest contribution or the greatest contribution to English poetry is the Spenserian stanza, which is admirably suited to the descriptive or the reflective poetry. It is used by Thomson in The Castle of Indolence, by Keats in The Eve of St. Anges, by Shelley in The Revolt of Islam, and by Byron in Childe Harold Pilgrimage. On account of all these factors, Spenser had been a potent influence on English poets of all the ages, and there is no exaggeration in the remark made by Charles Lamb that Spenser is the poet's poet. The Elizabethan period was also the period of the origin of modern English prose. During the rise of Elizabeth, prose began to be used as a vehicle of various forms of amusement and information, and its popularity increased on account of the increased facility provided by the printing press. Books on history, travel, adventures, translations of Italian stories appeared in a large number. Though there were a large number of prose writers, there were only two, Sidney and Lily, who were conscious of their art and who made solid contributions to the English prose style when it was in its infancy. The Elizabethan people were intoxicated with the use of the English language, which was being enriched by borrowings from ancient authors. They took delight in the use of flowery words and graceful, grandiloquent phrase. With the new waves of patriotism and national prestige, the English language, which had been previously eclipsed by Latin and relegated to a lower position, now come to its own, and it was fully exploited. The Elizabethan loved decorative modes of expression and flowery style. The next one is Lily, John Lily. The first author who wrote prose in the manner that the Elizabethan wanted was Lily, whose Euphues popularized a highly artificial and decorative style. It was read and copied by everybody. Its maximum phrases were freely quoted in the court and marketplace, and the word euphemism became a common description of an artificial and flamboyant style. The style of Euphues has three main characteristics, and in the first place, the structure of the sentence is based on the antithesis and alliteration. In other words, it consists of two equal parts which are similar in sound but with a different sense. For example, Euphues is described as a young man of more wit than wealth, yet of more wealth than wisdom. The second characteristics of this style is that no fact is stated without reference to some classical authority. For example, when the authors make a mention of friendship, he quotes the friendship that existed between David and Jonathan. Besides the classical allusions, there is also an abundance of allusions to the natural history, mostly of a fabulous kind, which is third characteristics. For example, the bull being tied to the fig, thee loseth his trail, and whole herd of the deer stand and gaze if they smell sweet apple. The purpose of writing Euphues was to instruct the courtiers and the gentlemen how to live, and so it is full of grave reflections and weighty morals. In it, there is also criticism of contemporary society, especially its extravagant fashion. Though puritanic in tone, it calculates, on the whole, a liberal and human outlook. Sidney's Arcadia is the first English example of prose pastoral romance, which was imitated by the various English authors for about 200 years. The story related in Arcadia in the midst of the pastoral surrounding where everything is possible is long enough to cover 20 modern novels, but is possible is long enough to its main attraction lies in the style, which is highly poetical and exhaustive. One word is used again and again in different senses until its meaning are exhausted. It is full of pathetic fallacy, which means establishing the connections between the appearance of nature with the mode of the artist. On the whole, Arcadia goes one degree beyond Euphrates in the direction of freedom and poetry. Two other important writers who, among others, influenced Elizabethan prose were Malory and Hakluyt. Malory wrote a great prose romance, Morte d'Arthur, dealing with the romantic treasure of the Middle Ages. It was by the virtue of the simple directness of language that it proved an admirable model to the prose storyteller of the Renaissance England. Richard Hakluyt's Voyage and other such books describing sea adventures were written in simple and unaffected directness. The writer was conscious of the only that he had something to tell that was worth telling. So that was all for today. Hope you enjoyed the video. Stay connected for more literary videos. Me, Fairy, signing out from the Literary Nook by Fairy.